Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. This is part 2 of our kind of introduction to the history of India. If you did not see part 1 of my reaction, there's a link in the description. There's also a link to the original content if you want to check that out. Also, if you've never considered it before, I would love to invite you to consider becoming one of our patrons. There's a link in the description that will take you to Patreon. Going to be some updates coming in the coming days to our Patreon, maybe adding some additional levels to Patreon, as well as some new perks and some new merch. In the process of revamping a lot of things. There's a new website that's coming, but I'll be posting a special video about all of that stuff in the very near future. In the meantime, we're going to dive back into this. I want to thank everybody for their great input yesterday after part 1, directing me to a lot of other great videos where I can learn more about India. We will definitely be taking a look at some of those in the very near future. This is not our only time that we're going to cover this topic. There's a lot of history that I don't know much about, and this is one of those things. So let's continue on. This is the history of India in 14 minutes. It's part 2.
India's modern history consists of war, rebellion, independence, and all that comes along with the establishment of a new nation. From world wars to independence from the British to the Indo-Pakistan Wars, a lot has happened for the young sovereign state in the past century. When World War I broke out, India was still under the British Crown and was, therefore, an automatic contributor to the Triple Entente's war efforts. Over 1 million Indian troops joined the fight, making the Indian Army one of the largest armies involved.
I was going to say, without India on the side of the Entente, it's difficult to see a way that this war gets won. I mean, 1 million men, that's a significant... Now, granted, all of these armies had millions of men, but especially on the Allied side, the Entente, the British and the French both had significant representation among their colonies, and of course the British Commonwealth. So you go there today, go to the Western Front, for example, and start walking through cemeteries, and you see Canada and South Africa and Morocco and India and all of these other places that these soldiers came from literally all over the world to contribute. This was not just a European war.
In the Second World War, India sent over 2.5 million troops to fight under British command. While India itself was not really in a position of authority during these wars, due to their contemporary lack of independence, both events were still a notable part of the country's history, given the number of men who joined the fight alongside Britain.
Yeah, think about that. You don't really think about, like, when you're thinking about the history of World War I and World War II, you don't think about the major impact and troop movements of the Indian forces, but 2.5 million served. That's a significant contribution, all without really any say in what's happening because you're under command of a colonial power.
This video was sponsored by The Great Courses Plus. Because I like to create videos about history, I seek to know more about this topic every day. But regardless of your passions, learning new things should be an important goal in life. The Great Courses Plus is a subscription on-demand video learning service with top-notch courses from top professors from great universities and other experts. Through your subscription, you get access to over 11,000 video lectures about anything that might interest you.
You know, people ask me all the time, man, how do you know so much about so many different topics? And honestly, it's not because there's anything special about me. It's just that I make the time every single day to learn something I didn't know before. And I allow myself to get interested in new things. And one of the ways I do that is, you hear me talk about movies all the time. I love movies, I love TV shows. And I allow those to become catalysts for me to learn. So when I watched Braveheart for the first time, I spent the next 3 weeks learning all I could about the real William Wallace, the real Edward I, and what the history was behind that stuff. When I first watched The Tudors on TV, that TV series, which has some, historical elements, but a lot of it's fictionalized, much like The Crown and other shows. But that led me to this passion for studying the Wars of the Roses and the Tudor period. And so just allow yourself every single day, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes, even if it's just when you're driving to work in the morning, listening to a podcast or listening to an Audible book. learn every single day, and pretty soon you'll find that you're retaining a lot of that and knowing things you didn't know before.
From finance to music, you may find so many great lectures to watch. I recommend a great course called A History of India. An award-winning professor takes you on a breathtaking survey of South Asia from its earliest societies and civilizations to the modern days of India. In this course, you can find more information about the Indian subcontinent, a place with such a rich history. The Great Courses Plus is giving our viewers a great offer of a free trial. You can support our channel and also learn new things by clicking on my link in the description and subscribing to the Great Courses Plus.
Though the Allies won World War II, the effects of the conflict were impressively damaging for the British Empire. Agreements with the United States led Britain to begin decolonizing many of its territories.
So look at that right now. I mean, look at here's the UK right here, right? So this is Great Britain, and then Northern Ireland, that makes the United Kingdom. Totally. And look at all of the territories at this point that are under British control or a part of their dominion. Now, granted, like some of these, like Canada, for example, is largely independent. They're not really, colonized by the British at this point. But think of what it takes for a country the size of Britain, the resources, especially naval resources, to be able to kind of keep all that going.
And paved the way for India's independence movement to be accelerated. On June 3, 1947, the last British Governor-General of India, Viscount Louis Mountbatten, declared the partitioning of British India into India and Pakistan.
So Louis Mountbatten, I think it's pronounced Viscount, but that is a relative of the royal family. I believe he is the uncle to Prince Philip, who was Queen Elizabeth II's husband.
And the nations became their own sovereign states by August 15th of the same year.
And I should mention, too, that Prince William, current kind of next in line to become the Prince of Wales, he has a son named Louis, and I believe he is named after this guy.
This break from the British Crown gave both countries the choice of staying in or leaving the British Commonwealth. But in 1949, India chose to stay. By this point, Jawaharlal Nehru had become independent India's first prime minister after serving as the leader of the Indian National Congress prior to 1947.
So yeah, it's interesting that they note too that they mentioned that Pakistan and India were partitioned into separate countries because super rivalry right there going on. Both nuclear powers, certainly a place. It's one of those places where if things went badly, it could very quickly spread to other regions, other parts of the world, and it could be very, very bad for everybody involved. But yeah, a lot of close cultural and political ties there to this day.
The deputy prime minister was Vallabh Bhai Patel, who played a significant role in teaming up with Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru during the independence movement. Under his and Prime Minister Nehru's watchful eyes, a dramatic population exchange occurred between the Hindu majority of India and the Muslim majority of Pakistan, in addition to the First Kashmir War between the young neighboring nations. The first of 4 Indo-Pakistani conflicts, the Kashmir War, was a conflict over the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir and lasted from 1947 through 1948.
See, this is part of the problem when you have a power that is outside of this region, like the British, partitioning land that they used to control. You're going to have these kinds of things. You have the same thing happening in the Middle East, where you have the Kurdish north of Iraq that didn't get its own state. And so is fighting to try and have its independence, and it really doesn't identify with the rest of Iraq. And you've got these regions that are going to be fought over by other groups that were all once part of the same political entity, but now are separate. And now these people are saying, well, we've got people there, and they're saying we've got people there. And the same kinds of stuff was happening in Europe, throughout history. So these are the kinds of conflicts that erupt in the aftermath of freedom from a colonial rule.
While the provinces of Bengal and Punjab were to be divided between the newly formed India and Pakistan, the fate of Jammu and Kashmir was still unsettled, and Pakistan, anticipating the dissension, decided to mobilize tribal militia groups from Waziristan a few weeks before the war actually broke out. The reason why Jammu and Kashmir's destiny was so uncertain was due to the fact that the princely state was led by a Hindu Maharaja but was made up of a Muslim majority. There was heavy pressure from both sides to accede to either India or Pakistan, but some citizens of the state were even considering a push for complete independence from both countries.
Interesting.
Tensions boiled over at the start of October 1947 when a pro-Pakistani tribal rebellion in Kashmir broke out, and the Pakistani troops quickly came to their aid. Pakistan's goal was to seize the capital, Srinagar, within the first weeks of their arrival. Eventually, the Maharaja called on India for military assistance, and India agreed under the condition that Kashmir become part of India. The state's prime minister and Maharaja both accepted, and the instrument of accession was signed on October 26, 1947. Still, Pakistan and their tribal allies were unwilling to give up the fight. Combat continued until December of 1948, and there didn't seem to be an easy solution without major reinforcements and aggressive action from the Indian side. Desperate for a resolution, India approached the United Nations for support, and a ceasefire between India and Pakistan was reached with the UN's help on January 1st, 1949.
So this is interesting. What's the time period we're talking about? The United Nations is brand new at this point. This is one of the first places, I guess, that they're going to really get involved in a conflict. A year or two later, they're going to be getting involved in Korea, in the North and South Korean conflict that's going to erupt, and it's going to be UN forces fighting on the side of South Korea, trying to keep communism from spreading. But this is even earlier than that.
The same year, other princely states, such as Manipur and Tripura, also acceded to India, and the nation's constitution was close to being established. In November of 1949, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and his committee drafted the official Constitution of India, which would come into effect and turn the country into an independent democratic republic on January 26, 1950. And
By the way, if you hear any noise in the background, there is a pretty bad storm going on outside. I'm hoping I keep power throughout this video.
Dr. Rajendra Prasad would become the first president of the republic. The first democratic elections were held in India in 1951 through 1952 over a 4-month span and brought a turnout of over 60%, re-electing both Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and President Rajendra Prasad for second terms.
Imagine the logistics involved in organizing national elections on this scale in a place where there haven't been before. It's not like, here in the United States, we've had elections since the Constitution in the 1780s when we, had just, small amount of people, a small population. We grew with this and we're able to expand as the country grew and expand our, this is all kind of being done in a huge nation with hundreds of millions of people for the first time. It's impressive stuff, and I can see how there probably would have been a lot of room for corruption to take place, and I don't know whether it did or not, but it certainly would be understandable if that kind of stuff was taking place.
During Nehru's second term, many reforms and legislative changes were made, and a Soviet-inspired 5-year plan was composed for the economy. Rights for women in Hindu societies were increased, caste discrimination was condemned with new legislation, and school education was encouraged.
It's interesting he mentions that something was inspired, like the 5-year plan, by the Soviets. It's an important lesson for us to learn that a lot of times in life, especially when it comes to governments, if an idea came from someone we hate or an idea came from someone that we are predisposed to be kind of opposed to or an enemy, we automatically often dismiss it because it was their idea, even though it might be a good idea. And so wisdom really calls for us to learn from others, even if we don't like those others, because just because we don't like them, just because we don't like the choices they make or the way they run things, doesn't mean that those aren't good ideas sometimes. Same thing's true politically, right? If you're a Republican, you're automatically going to say any idea Democrats come up with is bad. If you're a Democrat, you're going to think any idea Republicans come up with is bad, even though both sides sometimes have good ideas.
Nehru also appointed the States Reorganization Commission, which led to the passage of the States Reorganization Act in 1956. Many state borders were rearranged to create a better separation of linguistic and ethnic majorities as part of this decision.
Idea.
Many other milestones were reached during this time as well, including the launching of an atomic energy program in 1954, India's first computer being installed in 1955. Foreign policy under Nehru involved the co-founding of the Non-Aligned Movement, maintaining friendly relations with both the US and the Soviet Union.
There you go.
Despite this more neutral stance, though, India decided in 1961 to invade
Garcia.
and annex Portugal's colony of Goa after
I thought they were going to talk about there's an island off the coast that is leased.
repeated unsuccessful petitions for a peaceful transfer. The following year, the Sino-Indian War between China and India briefly broke out due to a dispute over the Himalayan border, but a ceasefire was unilaterally declared by China only a month after the conflict began.
Could you imagine if a war broke out between those two countries today? They both have over 1 billion people. I mean, that's like, what, a third of the world's population lives in those two countries? Oof, that'd be awful.
There was a short span of peace, during which Prime Minister Nehru passed away on May 27, 1964, and was succeeded by Lal Bahadur Shastri. In 1965, India was again into war with Pakistan over the state of Kashmir. No notable changes were made by the warfare, and a ceasefire was eventually pushed on both sides by foreign powers who feared escalation. The Tashkent Agreement was signed by India and Pakistan on January 10, 1966, and had been mediated by the Soviet Union. Mysteriously, Prime Minister Shastri died the night after the agreement was signed.
I need to know more about that. So I've been reading up a little bit on this, some of the conspiracies that surround this. His family members noted his face and body had unnatural blue and white spots, and there were cut marks on his abdomen and the back of his neck. They could not come up with any valid conclusions. They didn't do a post-mortem on the body, which seems really unusual when we're dealing with a prime minister, especially right after this peace deal was signed. A couple of the witnesses that were going to testify in court ended up in car accidents, killed. One of them, an accident crushed his leg and took his memory. How convenient is that? There's theories about the CIA having been involved. But, yeah, it's all conspiracy stuff, and I don't know enough about it to be able to speak to it, but it does seem like the timing is a little suspicious on that.
The Prime Minister's untimely death resulted in Indira Gandhi, the daughter of Nehru, taking Shastri's place. In the next year's election, the Indian National Congress Party won fewer seats than they had in the past, likely due to the growing unemployment, economic stagnation, and rising prices brought about by the party's leadership so far.
Now, I think, he didn't mention it, but Mahatma Gandhi was shot and killed. And I believe the same thing happens to Indira Gandhi, even though I don't think she's not related, certainly not by blood, to the other Gandhi.
The Prime Minister's political advisor came to the aid of her reputation, however, and advised a shift towards more socialist policies, including the slashing of the Privy Purse Agreement, which gave payments to ruling families of the former princely states as part of their original deal to accede to India back in 1947.
So you can see why India would be, especially in this time, in the time of the Cold War, when there are a lot of proxy wars going on, places like Vietnam, Korea. You're going to end up having that happen later on in Afghanistan. You can see why India would be a major factor in all of that, because if you're the United States and you're the Soviet Union, what a huge deal it would be to get a emerging power with the population and the resources that India has to get them on your side. That would be huge. And so you can see if it's going one way or another how those countries might want to get involved.
Minister Gandhi's other decisions, including major attacks on the Congress Party's hierarchy and the subject of nationalizing the nation's bank, earned her increased popularity amongst the masses. Gandhi won re-election in 1971 and had now obtained an even larger majority, which only grew further as a result of her decision to intervene in the Bangladesh Liberation War, bringing about the Third Indo-Pakistani War. The conflict resulted in the freedom of East Pakistan, now known as Bangladesh. India also increased its involvement in world affairs, signing a 20-year Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation in August of 1971, aligning with the Soviet Union and adding strain to its relationship with the United States. In 1973, a rebellion broke out in the Kingdom of Sikkim, led by anti-royalist rioters who wished to abolish the monarchy. After 2 years of discord, Sikkim's prime minister reached out to India's government with an appeal for Sikkim to become an Indian state. The offer was taken, and the Indian army made their way to Gangtok in order to get some control in the region and disarm the Sikkim Palace Guards. A referendum was then held, showing a 97.5% favor for putting an end to the monarchy and integrating into India. On May 16, 1975, that wish became a reality, making Sikkim the 22nd state of the Indian Union. While India grew, Prime Minister Gandhi's popularity now took a downward spiral as allegations of corruption from the people. Indira Gandhi's power was at risk as her opposition from all sides came together to protest the Prime Minister's accused dictatorship. She eventually advised President Ali Ahmed to declare a state of emergency in order to give her additional powers and the ability to suspend the civil liberties of their citizens under the guise of maintaining law and order.
There's an echo of something here. I can't quite put my finger on it, but a prime minister getting the president to grant them emergency powers. I mean, it's not exactly how it went down in Germany in the early 1930s, but it certainly smacks of that a little bit.
State and national elections were also postponed, and almost 1,000 members of the opposition were thrown into prisons, protests being banned indefinitely. While the economy was actually improving by the lack of political unrest and new productivity, the government was continuously accused of corruption and abuses of power, making it no surprise that Indira Gandhi and her Congress Party were routed in the 1977 general elections by the Janata Party. Morarji Desai became the new prime minister. Then, Charan Singh became the fifth prime minister in 1979 as the Janata coalition fell into disarray. Singh's interim government was replaced in January of 1980 by Indira Gandhi and her Congress Party once again, although after a rise in tensions and violence in the Sikh community of India following Operation Blue Star and the raid of the Golden Temple, which was being used by rebellious Khalistan militants as a hideout, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her own Sikh bodyguards in 1984.
Wow.
Anti-Sikh riots erupted in Delhi, and thousands of Sikhs perished as a result. Members of Congress were accused of inciting the violence, but the party was fairly unfazed and moved on to choose Rajiv Gandhi, Indira's eldest son, as her replacement.
So now you've had three people with the surname Gandhi in leadership here. So interesting, religious tension, religious violence. Anytime you have a super state like this, a massive sized country that has multiple ethnic groups and multiple identities and multiple religions, you're going to have these regions where it's going to be very difficult to control all of that.
Under Rajiv's administration, Parliament was dissolved in 1989, the Congress Party gained a 415 to 545 majority, and many reforms took place, as well as improved relations with the United States. Prime Minister Rajiv had a mostly flawless reputation, known by the press as Mr. Clean, until a scandal was unearthed, revealing that a weapons contract between India and Sweden provided kickbacks from the Swedish arms dealer for multiple politicians on both sides, including Rajiv Gandhi himself. the Congress Party's popularity plummeted once again, and Singh became the next prime minister after the 1989 elections. More governmental unrest followed, until Narasimha Rao took power in 1991 and made sweeping economic and political reforms. While the Bombay riots and other Hindu-Muslim conflicts exploded across India, new corruption stripped most support from Rao's administration and party, and they were humiliated at the next election by the Bharatiya Janata Party. Under this party's new leadership, relations with the US greatly improved, and the American President Bill Clinton made a visit to India to promote the relationship even further. Attempts were also made to create more friendly ties with Pakistan, but a failed summit in 2001 brought about no real change.
2001, what's going on in 2001? Well, this is when we're going to have the September 11th attacks, which are going to be, of course, traced back to Afghanistan. You're going to end up having a lot of issues with Pakistan. Pakistan's where we're going to find out that bin Laden's hiding. So this region is going to be really under a microscope during that time.
Today, India is still a developing nation with almost 1.4 billion people and so many ethnicities. While the history of India is rich and vast, the independent nation is still growing into a truly strong and developed country of its own.
Fascinating stuff, and it's just, like I said, it's just the beginning. There's so much more to learn, and I know a lot of you pointed out, oh, I can't believe they didn't mention this or this or this. Well, a country like India with the incredible history that it has had for thousands of years, in 20 or 25 minutes, you can't possibly begin to touch on everything. So we'll get into some more details. I know Overly Sarcastic Productions has some India videos. I know Extra History has some stuff on India, and there's some others. Continue to recommend those things to me. If you have something to add to what we just talked about, if there's anything that maybe I missed that needs to be mentioned or corrected, please use the comment section below. And we will be back again soon with some more content. Thanks for watching.